There are resources, and a lot of people don't realize actually how many resources are out there. And I'll take it a step further. They are playing such a key role and will play an even more important role as our healthcare system continues to let us down.
Welcome to the Endgame by Clear Estate, a discussion series where we get real about estate administration, estate planning, and our efforts to disrupt old systems with new technology. I'm Davide Pisano, one of the co-founders of Clear Estate and CEO, joined by Sara Hillier, our head expert on all things estate planning and administration. This episode is really about transitions. We're going to talk about senior transitions, and it gets complicated, and you know, in our conversation with our guest, we'll get a great debrief about the various models, the home care model, the semi-independent residence model, the full service residence model. It gets complicated when you're not in that space, and you're not talking about it all the time. So I really enjoy that, and really enjoyed kind of like the framing around that, and we'll also explore how to think about the options around transition. We'll talk about new technologies out there that are supporting people's transition in their senior years, and we'll also talk about like all kinds of new types of professionals that are, with an aging population. There's a lot of people that are specializing in supporting people's transition. So, Sara, just talk to us a little bit about our guest.
Today we're going to have on Matt Del Vecchio. He's the founder of Liana's Senior Transitions, which is a free service for seniors that helps them find the right placement or support agencies for their needs, kind of a broker for that type of need. He also hosts a longstanding podcast and radio show in Montreal called Life Unrehearsed, which I believe, Davide,
I was a guest on.
Yes,
I was a guest on.
And I heard that episode got a lot of traction.
It was the best episode ever.
Matt's also a CPCA, which stands for Certified Professional Consultant on Aging. And he does have all sorts of practical tips on how to navigate the world of seniors residences and that transition, and kind of what are the important questions that parents and their kids need to ask, and what is the important information they need to know as they're navigating that life transition.
Matt is an awesome person and very knowledgeable. So on the show, we talk a lot about endings and transitions. Very often we talk about it negatively, in the sense of like death is not always negative for the person that passes away, but for the family, it's typically quite painful. But in this particular case, in terms of talking about senior transition, the transition can be actually quite positive. And I think what we want to do and what we want to talk about today is really how to proactively engage with that transition thought process and conversation, and put some framing around it, and give a lot of information about thinking it through and what the options are for people. Pop culture does not help here. The senior home is not typically seen as something you want to move forward to. I have in mind the Sopranos episode. I think Livia Soprano, looking at the home that Tony lined up for her and going like, it's a senior home, and Tony screaming like, it's a retirement community. And I think, she orders a hit on him, but that's besides the point. But I think most people see moving towards the transition towards the end as something that kind of signals the end of life. But that transition can actually be something quite positive. It can actually increase quality of life. It can actually extend life. It can actually diminish the risks, health risks, or kind of kinds of emergencies that somebody faces. So I think this can be seen as something quite positive. And we know this transition is part of the broader topic of estate planning, as is often the case in all of the things that we talk about. The transition starts with a plan and typically a conversation with family members. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's definitely something that I think most people, to a certain extent, do mention in some way, shape, or form, kind of their preferences when it comes to, if their health declines, like where they want to live and things like that. But they don't often get into the specifics, right? Like most people will tell their kids, "I want to stay at home for as long as possible," but they won't actually, do the work of going through how feasible is that, right? What does that actually look like? What does it mean for how are you going to be supported in the home? All of those things, right? And I think that's where we want to see people move more towards, is actually going through the conversation in more detail.
Yeah, and I think part of it is not just the how feasible it is, but the actual cost. And by that I don't mean dollar cost. I mean the cost on other family members, because
Absolutely. Yeah.
staying at home as long as possible typically requires um, other family members supporting. Otherwise, you often need 24-hour care, or you need
Yeah.
somebody to go pretty often. Somebody needs to do groceries. Somebody needs to clean. Somebody. So it is a cost, and
Absolutely.
I think most parents, when going through that cost in their mind, will go, well, maybe I didn't think that through. Maybe we need to rethink this. We'll talk about it with Matt, but it's really it's really about quality of life. It's about the family. It's really about understanding resources that are available. It's also an evolving situation where transition is multi-staged.
Mhm.
Sometimes it can happen dramatically, but sometimes it happens over a long period of time where there's multiple transitions towards I would say the third phase of our lives. Our guest, Matt Del Vecchio, is a Canadian leader in the space. He's work on senior transitions. And the way he talks to families reminds me of our own team at Clear Estate. And I think we share a lot of values. And I think that's why we hit it off with Matt in multiple channels and multiple conversations. It's a lot of empathy there. And, his mission, he's made it his mission in life to make people's lives better towards the end. So let's get practical about the transition meeting and the first steps you can take right away to plan a downsize or a senior transition. Please don't forget to subscribe to The Endgame by Clear Estate on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. We have Matt Del Vecchio today with us. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Davide.
Your radio show, Life Unrehearsed, and a fantastic conversation. I know you have a business, you do media around transition, around estate planning, around senior living. Tell us a little bit about how you got there, like what got you, to this space and to be quite active, from an advocacy standpoint, but also from a business standpoint.
Yeah, no, it actually started 10 years ago. I was a corporate guy and doing my corporate thing, and then in my late 40s, I said, you know what, I think I could be doing better for society, better for my family, and jumped into the world. What started off as helping families in senior living. We literally do tours all week long with our team and helping navigate what are the best options for families, always emotional. Some very looking forward to it, proactive, just downsizing. So it started like that. And as things developed, many families were asking, okay, great, you found the right place, but now we need help with navigation. So we're doing, we're into real estate, we're into downsizing, we're into moving. And most recently, the last couple of years, we're actually now doing home care. Many people, the vast majority of Canadians want to age in place. And as our healthcare system is letting Canadians down, we're getting more demand for home care. So it's sort of developed over the last 10 years into what we'd like to think helping families throughout the aging process. And our population is aging, as you're aware, and so we'd like to think that we're kind of the go-to source. If you've got a challenge with mom or dad, we're going to be able to help.
Typically, your client or the people you talk to, is it the family or is it the person that wants to transition? Like who comes to you first?
Yeah, interesting. The vast majority of cases, and I'll really narrow it down, it's the adult daughter. I'm going to say
Okay.
80% of our conversations are with the adult daughter. I'm not proud to say this as an adult son, but that's just the reality. But we're dealing with the adult children, daughters and sons by far. The one exception would be if we're talking to a couple or a widow or widower living in the family home that are being proactive and want to downsize, then we're dealing directly with them. But in the majority of cases with the adult children, the children, typical sandwich generation, right? They've got their own kids. They're worried about their parents. They may be seeing things differently. Most parents think they're totally fine. There's nothing wrong with me. The kids see it in a different light, and always difficult conversations and discussions. But as a result, the children are also comfortable on Google searches and internet searches where the generation of the seniors might not be so comfortable. So that's the majority is with the kids.
And what's typically is there like a trigger event? Is it most of the adult daughters, like are they highly proactive, or is this something where mommy falls down or there's a health scare or something, and then they come to see you?
Yeah, it has usually been due to, I wouldn't say just one trigger event, a series of events that have been a red flag. Okay, again, I'm the exception being the proactive couple, widow, widower. They're just, the trigger event for those is the roof is leaking and I got to do another repair, and this is crazy. The home ownership is becoming a burden. But in all likelihood, having a conversation with mom, if she's living alone, maybe she forgot something. Boy, that's a little strange. Or there will be mobility issues now, and she's trying to navigate stairs, which is a little more difficult. There could be a big trigger event is a slip or a fall, a broken hip, and you're hospitalized. And now, you think you're going to fully recover, but you have a new baseline. And so we start to get these trigger events, either physical or cognitive, that the children see. And a lot of the times they're reaching out saying, look, I just want to start inquiring, about maybe some home care or potentially moving, versus what we call a reactive trigger event. There's a hospitalization and it's not a good situation, and the doctor tells the family, I'm sorry, your dad cannot go back home.
Can't go back home.
And that's crisis mode. And so we have those situations quite often, and we could help families, and proud to say we could help families with that. But those are emotional. Those are really tough because you're not prepared. You have to deal with a situation you really don't want to deal with. And so we're always a big proponent of trying to be as proactive as possible as opposed to waiting for this reactive crisis mode.
What piece of advice do you have in terms of the conversation with the parent? Because I'm assuming, it's emotional on both parts, correct? Like it's emotional on the side of the child, but it's also it's a loss of independence. It's a signal that death is coming, or that at least it's a downward slope. What's the advice you have in terms of framing that conversation and or planting the seed at some point in order for the transition to actually happen a little bit more easily?
You're right. We call these essential conversations that should happen usually years before the actual conversation starts, because it is difficult. You're right. It's generally a topic of even thinking about I need help at home, or if I've got to move to another residence. You're absolutely right. It's that dignity, that pride, that thought of, oh my goodness, I am actually aging, and death is imminent, and all these thoughts go through your head, and it's scary, and it creates anxiety. So we tend to avoid those conversations. So it's super important. You don't want the government deciding the health of your parent on what to do. You need to be proactive, and you have to have these tough conversations. So we always, in order to engage in these essential conversations, we were just talking, Davide, about trigger events. We're always talking about look for trigger events. A trigger event, by the way, doesn't have to be something drastic. It could simply be your neighbor has sold their house and is now moving to a retirement home proactively. Or the neighbor fell and is hospitalized. Oh my goodness, is everything okay? Or the neighbor, oh my goodness, wandered outside their home. They rang our doorbell. These are trigger events that are starting conversations with your own family. It doesn't even have to be your own family. You're listening to this podcast, as an example, is also a trigger event. Hey, I heard a podcast. So it's not you being the bad guy. You're looking for reasons to create the conversation. So always try to look for some things that are going around the family. So you could have a little conversation. Oh boy, they went to the hospital. They told the husband that they can't go back home. Ma, what would we do in that situation? And so look at other events to start those conversations, because that could start many other conversations, like just estate planning. What happens if you become incapacitated? It's not just about home care and moving. These are big picture conversations that need to happen with all families.
Super interesting. So you're in the industry. What are the biggest trends? I mean, you've been doing this for 10 years. Do you see kind of major trends, both in terms of senior living, but also in terms of home care? Like where do you see, I would call it the market going, but are there specific preferences of people? Is there technology that's evolving? What are the 2 or 3 big things that you see happening in the market?
Yeah, for sure. Number one trend, a failing healthcare system right across the country. The bottom line is governments are pouring more money than ever before into healthcare, except they can't keep up with the aging population. This is the problem. The governments are all saying, yeah, we're pouring more money, more hours than we've ever had before. But unfortunately, it's not near enough that's required. So the trend of that is creating a lot of anxiety for the adult daughters and adult sons and parents out there. So one of the trends I would say is that there's longer and longer waiting lists to get into public nursing homes. There's a domino effect due to that. Okay, you're telling me it's 2 to 3 years to get into a residence? Oh my God, what are we going to do in these 2 to 3 years? So due to that, more and more people are looking for home care. We have to take care of mom or dad. There's no place. And so we're seeing higher demands for home care, both in the public system, and because of those higher demands, there's not as much home care available. Now there's more people looking to go private just to help out. And not just if they can't afford private home care, because it does get expensive, people are quitting their jobs or trying to get as many family members involved in the care at home because, oh my goodness, mom's getting up in the middle of the night, she's wandering, or she has to go to the washroom, and she doesn't realize she's got mobility issues, she's at a fall risk. So there's all this domino effect, starting with a weakened healthcare system. I will also say one of the other trends that we're all aware of is our aging population. And so aging population is triggering a lot of downsizing. Okay, so this isn't really a healthcare issue. It's people that are just aging. The kids are gone. Maybe there's a death of a spouse, but they're still in that family home. So we're seeing a lot of downsizing going on where they want to figure out, where am I going to go? They love the backyard. They love the garden, so they try to extend that as long as possible. But eventually they reach a point where maybe this doesn't make sense to be paying all my property taxes and all the repairs every year. And they're doing some downsizing into a nice retirement home where I would like to think you got the best of both worlds. You have your independent living, but you have access to services. And God forbid if something's wrong, there's a nurse there. You can get a meal every now and then. So we're seeing a big trend in that as well.
Both my parents were in geriatrics their whole lives. And so I heard my whole life talking about aging. And I heard my whole life people using various words to describe various institutions. And we talk about residences, we talk about senior living, we talk about retirement homes. There's a lot of words that we use to describe kind of like that transition and the various places, and probably the hospital at the end, but there's various places in between. Help me demystify all of this. Like, what are the various categories of places people can transition to? I mean, you describe one, which is adapting the home, but then beyond adapting the home and providing services at home, what are the various categories of places people can go to?
Yeah, the word that I hear a lot, which is the absolute worst word, is facility.
Yes, facility.
It's
sounds like a jail.
Exactly. Really terrible. So, let's do evolution of care, continuum of care of every Canadian. You want to age in place, you're going to adapt the home. Maybe you get a cleaning lady. Maybe you're going to get some landscaping services, and you're going to continue doing things so you can stay at home longer. The next stage after that isn't necessarily a nursing home. That's the last stage. Nursing home is the term I would use, or a public health facility is a terrible word, but that's how some people call it, and we're trying to change the wording of that. But that's a nursing home is at the other extreme. Okay, nursing home is usually, you can go right to end of life from a nursing home. But there's still a quality of life from moving from a home to a nursing home. You can have 10, 15, 20 years in there. So there's a lot of categories. I'm going to break it into three. There's independent living. So you could have a kitchen in a retirement home and best of both worlds. There's lots of activities, but you're still independent. There's what we call semi-autonomous or assisted living. Next level. So usually no kitchens, meals included, some levels of care being provided, maybe some assistance with dressing, medication management for those with neurocognitive disorders, housekeeping, laundry. Those are all assisted living. And then the third category is that long-term care. Okay, now we're into that nursing home category. So after home, independent living, then assisted living, then nursing home.
Basically, the government can't provide any of this anymore, or actually is not keeping up, and so private solutions are rising. We talk about a home building crisis in Canada. Like I'm assuming it's the case as well in the private sector for those housing solutions. I mean, are we satisfying the demand, or is there a big gap even in the private sector?
Yeah, so for sure, huge gap in the public sector, and in the private sector. Tons of competition. I think the services are there. Usually the barrier is financial. Okay, no matter which way you slice it, private retirement homes or private home care can get expensive for many Canadians. And that's where the challenge is. It's no problem to find a home care company like mine. There's lots of competitors that we deal with. I don't want to say it's no problem to find a retirement home, even in the private sector now. The building of new private retirement homes aren't keeping up with the demand that's there. So we're seeing some issues in terms of availability and vacancy levels. That's going to be an issue, especially over the next 5 years. But it's not like these crazy waiting lists of 2 to 3 years, 4 years, 5 years in Ontario for some residents. You can get in pretty quick. We're seeing the gap on assisted living because there's not many assisted living apartments out there, and because our population's aging, care is increasing, there's more demand for assisted living. So we're seeing a little bit of a gap there. And I will also say that there are some chains of residences that see this clearly, and they're ramping up their assisted living, but it's a business for some of them. And we're actually seeing the opposite with some chains where they're getting out of assisted living because they're not making their profits that they were hoping to. And so they're closing down some assisted living floors and opening up independent living, which is a concern for people like me because that's just reducing the availability out there.
From adapting the home to getting some help at home to kind of transitioning, what's the range in costs and what should I have in mind in terms of, when it happens to me, it's going to be in a couple of years, but hopefully, but what's the dollar amount?
So what I'll try to do, because it's a very difficult question, because I don't want to give a black and white answer, because it's not black and white, especially this podcast is going nationwide, even in the US, the rates will vary, but I'll give some generalizations. Okay. And I'll also start with what families are doing is if they have to do home care, most families want to do it home care, they're going to start spending on home care first. Once they start spending at the level of what it's going to cost to move into a retirement home, that's when families are making the move. Because you're getting 24/7 in a good assisted living retirement home. Whereas at home, you're not getting 24/7 caregivers. Okay, you're probably coming in 5 days a week, 7 days a week, and so on. So people are usually starting to spend their dollars on home care and building it up and finding out where that break even is. So We could, and I'm really going to generalize because it will vary, but independent living with a kitchen, you don't need meals, you don't need care, you might get housekeeping once a month and indoor parking. You can get a 1-bedroom apartment anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500 Canadian per month. Okay, and you're going to be in a safe, secure environment. There's going to be activities. There's going to be, pharmacies and a convenience store, but you don't require any care. You don't require any meals. Some people will do an a la carte meal and go down to the dining room and treat them and treat themselves. But where the costs start ramping up is if you need to go from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, you might be adding another $1,000 to your rent just for that 2nd bedroom. Meals, if you want a meal a day, you might be adding another $500 a month if you needed a meal a day. So this is why I got to give you a bit of a gray answer. And
of course, it's a range.
And then where it starts to really get costly is the care, because it's labor. What they do, everyone is the same thing. There's going to be an evaluation done by a director of care or head nurse to determine the number of hours of care is required. That's labor. That's built into the cost. So assisted living, where you're going to get your meals, you're going to get some care, weekly bathing, laundry, housekeeping, you're going to range anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 a month. And then the higher levels of assisted living or even long-term care in the private sector, what we call sometimes memory care, high levels of security, you can get in the $8,000 to $12,000 range per month for this type of care.
Very expensive.
Yeah, it is. And I'll just give the home care example here, okay, because it will vary. The home care companies are quite simple. They charge on an hourly basis. Mm-hmm. Home care companies will usually have minimums, 3-4 hours a day or 15-20 hours a week. But the going rate is going to be somewhere in the $36 to $45 an hour range for PSW type work. PSW, being a private personal support worker. Nursing services. Most people think, I need a nurse for mom. Most of the time, you don't need a nurse. If you need injections or bandage replacement, okay, now you're talking nursing services. The vast majority of home care in Canada is going to be with personal support workers. Assistants, someone at their side, meal preparation, assistance with dressing and undressing, toileting. That is, so the rates I'm giving of that, 35, 36 to 45, 46 range are PSW rates across the country.
That's very helpful information. So first of all, it is costly and people need to think about it. But you're right. At some point, there's an ROI kind of like thinking that goes, hey, if it's costing X per month or X per week, then might as well transition. You talked about home care, because most people would like to stay at home as long as possible. What are the key considerations to, apart from financial and the size of the house, but are there, I think of obvious things like if there's 5 flights of stairs and people can't walk or can't climb the stairs, then that's an issue. Are there things to consider, basic things to consider in terms of well, this is a good situation for home care, whereas this is not a good situation for home care?
I would say one of certainly ranked top 1 or top 2 is the caregiver themselves. All right, so I'll give you a couple of examples. If it's a couple, I've yet to meet a couple with exact same care levels. So it's either the husband taking care of his wife taking care of her spouse. We see a lot of caregiver burnout. We see and again, male-female thing. Not proud of it, but let's face it, the generation, people in their 80s, 70s, usually the male was the breadwinner, mm-hmm. and mom stayed at home, raised the kids. So if it's a situation where now it's role reversal, someone in their 80s and the male, the husband, is healthy, but his wife is not doing well, could be cognitive, might have Alzheimer's, might be physical issues. What we usually see in our world is very stressful for that caregiver, not accustomed to it. And sometimes, quite frankly, they don't want to deal with it. That's just, we see that a lot. And so that is one of the factors that come into play with home care, is because the caregiver is not able to provide enough care, the proper care. They're stressed. So I would say that's one of the major factors. Of course, when we talk the stairs and so on, that's important, but, that's not the number one reason we have people calling us to get home care. It's usually because we need help. We just need help, someone to be around. I need to get out and do the groceries. I need to go out and play bridge with the girls. Or I need to go out and just go to the pub and have a beer with the boys. I need a break. And so that's not necessarily the stairs issues. That, again, is a caregiver issue. And we're seeing most people looking for home care is because the caregiver is just really at their end.
And do you see a lot of people moving in with their kids, or people adapting their homes in order to get mom and dad? We talked about. I remember at some point there was this nanny suite, or like people use those words. Is that a trend, or you see it the other way around, which is people are too busy and they can't really handle it?
It's interesting. So we're seeing multi-generational homes. We are seeing that. I usually get this question a lot. It's the caring daughter, the caring son. You know what? I'm thinking about bringing mom home. I just don't like seeing mom like this. And I don't want to say in every single case, but in the vast majority of cases, the thought is there. It's the love. It's an emotional decision. I want to think, but the reality of doing that move, especially if you're working, especially if you've got teenagers around or younger kids, the reality of bringing a parent home, it turns real very, very quickly. We usually get a call, I'm going to say within a month or two, saying, what was I thinking? I love my mom. This is why I did this. Or I love my dad. But the reality of trying to make that happen is much, much more difficult than the love and emotion behind that decision.
The underlying theme here is that there's a child that's either taken care of or thinking about taking care of or actively engaged or knows that they're going to be engaged in the future and trying to figure it out. There seems to be, first of all, a lot of time issues for that child. There seems to be mental stress. There's a lot of stuff that's going on for that particular person. Are there resources, beyond the transition and beyond the elderly, are there resources for people that are helping, both mental and just guidelines and just how-to books?
Yeah, Davide, you're bringing up a very important point, okay? Because there are resources, and a lot of people don't realize actually how many resources are out there. And I'll take it a step further. These resources, we're talking nonprofits, associations, Parkinson's Association, Alzheimer's Society, lots of local community and municipal resources. They are playing such a key role and will play an even more important role as our healthcare system continues to let us down. So I encourage any listener to tap into these resources. You may not know. There's Facebook support groups all across the country giving good ideas. Oh, I have this situation. I went to this resource to help out. I needed to, my dad is going through some cancer treatments, going through some chemo. I need someone to drive him there. There's many resources that will do that. So I think it's crucial that the word has to get out that the resources are there. Never enough, but we could tap into these resources more simply because of the unknown that people don't know they exist. So I think you're bringing up an absolutely huge point and will only become more important.
You have the conversation with I keep on coming down to the adult daughter because you said it's 80% of the cases. I'm assuming there's guilt there. I'm assuming there's emotion. I'm assuming if it were me in that particular moment, I'd feel a little bit like a failure, a little bit like my parents took care of me and I can't do it. And so how do you deal with that? And how do you help? I'm assuming you have the conversation, so you must help them a little bit. But how should one think about this?
I write for a Montreal newspaper. I'm their seniors and aging columnist, and this topic of guilt was just last month, as a matter of fact. And I will say it's very cultural too, Davide. Okay, in Quebec, it's around 18% of people 65 and over are living in some form of senior living community. 18%. The national average is around 8%. Ontario is around 6%. So I will start with guilt is cultural. However, At the end of the day, you have to step back. It's the oxygen mask in the airplane, right? You need to take care of yourself. And if you are considering getting home care or a move to a retirement home, the reason why you're doing it is because it is no longer sustainable. So you have to constantly play games with yourself and justify it, okay? Because it's not your fault. Aging happens, and you're trying your best to do it. But I've seen some people where the guilt, they're the ones that are going to be hospitalized. They're trying to do everything, and they're still trying to take care. Divorce rates going through the roof because, and that shouldn't be because of guilt. So you have to step back, look at your situation, and sometimes justify that, look, these are the reasons why we're doing it. And it's emotional, and yeah, it's not necessarily win-win, but for you to end up in a hospital or be divorced, is that the right end game? No.
Is there something in the process of aging and in the process of planning your estate and planning that transition and the process of seeing your parents do that and in the various conversations, is there something people can do in advance in order to make that whole thing easier? Because I'm assuming if I know I'm going to feel guilt, and if I'm a parent, I would not want my kids to feel guilty. And I refer to the fact that my parents spent both of their careers as medical professionals in the geriatrics space. And although my dad is Italian, and there's a cultural aspect to this, but my dad was very clear to me. He said, I wouldn't want you to feel the burden of me aging, because I've seen it, and I've seen the tax that it can, or the damage that it can actually create on families when there's too much of that guilt and too much of that heaviness of taking care of a parent. Is there an ideal path where people start having the conversation 10 years earlier and then the whole family evolves? Bottom line is, have you seen kind of like, what's the happy path? What's the best case scenario, and have you seen it, and what's the advice to actually make it happen?
Whenever you have to have these conversations, the guilt is usually with the children. Okay, how do I talk to the people? If you were to ask, I'm generalizing, but if you were to ask the average parent, they love their kids. There's nothing more important than their kids. Yes, there's family dynamics, and not all families get along, but once they understand what they're putting their daughter or their son through, because very few kids will say, this is what you're doing to me. But as soon as the parent realizes, they don't want to hurt their children. And in fact, this is what's happening. They're hurting their children. They don't want that. So I would say on average, just what you're talking about with your dad, could you imagine having that conversation 3-4 years beforehand? Having that conversation. And dad is going to be able to most likely bring up, you know what? I don't want to ever put you through that. You're looking at a situation of your neighbor or something. That's usually going to come out in those conversations. I wouldn't want to put you over. You're working. You take care of your kids. So you've got, it comes down to those essential conversations again earlier in the game if you can, because I think most parents don't want to hurt their children, and that eases that guilt. If you've had, imagine you, Davide, and you've had that conversation with your dad, and now it comes time to that tough decision. Does he have to go into a retirement home or long-term care home? He's told you already. I'm not saying the process is easy in the transition. Okay, it's difficult, it's emotional, but you're going to be able to sleep at night a little better knowing that this is actually what your dad wanted.
These things take so much time, and there's so much investment throughout a lifetime in order to guarantee that the next phase is positive. Not positive, because it's never positive, but at least is less negative for everybody. Mm-hmm. And we don't think about this on an everyday basis, but there's these micro decisions and micro conversations that have a huge impact over mental health and families over a long period of time. Changing topics a little bit, ClearState is a tech company, so I want to hear you a little bit about technology in that kind of like transition process, whether that's home-based or in senior living. Like, what role is technology playing in terms of basically keeping people at home longer and or making people's lives in some of these housing options better overall?
Technology will be playing a crucial role today, right now, and certainly in the future. And I'll give you an example. When we talk about, we're involved with families throughout the aging process. And let's go to end, palliative care, long-term care. The stage before that, assisted living, and then independent living, retirement homes, and then home. Technology is starting to play a crucial role at the beginning stages, so they can live at home longer. So we're starting to see sensors. We're starting to see, these medical alert systems. Even if there's a risk of leaving the stove on, there's mechanisms now to prevent the stove from burning. And technology will be very, very important to allow people to live at home longer. And that's developing rapidly. Okay, and that's going to be a good thing. You're in the tech world, and we're starting to see some real benefits. At the other end of it, let's talk about retirement homes or seniors' residences. I'm going to give an example. This just happened to me last month. I was with a family, 2 adult children. A son was involved. It was a daughter and a son. 2 of them, daughter and a son. We're actually on the assisted living memory care floor. And we're touring around. It's on the 3rd floor. And we finished our tour. We go into the elevator, and there was another lady that was there. And, hey, how are you? Comes in the elevator with us. Completely normal. Had us all. And then entered the elevator, and these alarms went up. Beep, 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 beep. And the elevator door would not shut. And we're like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? It was a resident, flight risk, wanderer, had a bracelet on her. She was deemed a flight risk. She's tried to get out a couple times. Very devious sometimes. We had no idea that she was a resident there. So there's a very good example of technology working even at the retirement residence level. There's sensors for beds now if you want to get up. So technology, very important. Good advancements, very encouraging as well, because it will help us live longer.
I'm going to sound crazy, but are you seeing robots being deployed more and more in terms of helping people? I mean, I have a Roomba at home, but apart from that.
Well, it's not there yet. Believe it or not, or in Japan, robots are starting to come into play. If there's going to be a market for it in Canada, it's going to be in a group setting, where there's a robot that can sort of take the role of activity director. There's something going on, or some games, or watching, or music. So we're starting to see a little bit of this in Canada. We're far from it, from being in the individual homes.
I know in hospitals are starting to deploy them in terms of like delivering things, just like in hotels and things like that. So, but you're right. I think the cost right now, the cost for individual or home base is a lot. Is technology playing a role beyond the bracelets and things like that? Do you see technology playing a role in keeping people independent longer, both in terms of stimulation and in terms of communication with their children? Beyond, I would say, the hardware and beyond kind of like the framing, is this something that keeps us more intellectually active longer, or not? Are we all getting dumber and older quicker because of Facebook and our telephones?
No, in fact, I think there's a lot of positive from the Alexas, the FaceTiming. Now we're getting more, especially with out of town adult children, they're getting more engaged with mom or dad who are at home, whereas they had to rely on seeing them in their quarterly visit and hopping on a plane to see them. So technology is helping the social aspect, and social isolation is a real big issue, in terms of health and well-being. So it's helping on isolation, technology for medication management reminders. You're setting up your Alexa or what have you, and then, okay, you got to take your pill at 2 p.m. Beep. It's a reminder for that. So I absolutely think, even a simple, which people are doing, a FaceTiming or a WhatsApp video with the grandchildren. We couldn't do that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, let's say, and that is a simple little example of how technology is advancing, and it's helping that overall health and well-being of the individual, particularly for people living alone.
We've had the conversation. Mom and dad are ready. We've extended the home care as long as we could. We've stretched Alexa as much as Alexa could support. We've made the decision to transition. We found a new place, or maybe we're thinking about it. So first of all, how long does it all take? Do I have to, I call a moving company? Who's going to sell the junk in the basement? What do we keep, not keep? Do we start distributing things right away, irrespective of the estate plan? Like what's the process and what's the mechanics of actually the transition?
This topic is usually the elephant in the room and why people stay at home longer than they should stay at home, especially if you've been in the family home for a long time. You've got the memories, you've got the boxes, maybe you've got a little hoarding going on. I'm not talking, we've seen the major hoarders, but everyone gathers stuff. And it's the trophy of their son when they got out of the 6 years old that they could never dream of getting rid of. So this is the elephant in the room. And so there's a real developing market in what we call downsizing. There's downsizers all across the country specializing in this. Okay, you need a good real estate broker if you have to sell a home that understands seniors in transition. That's quite important. It's very different than your traditional real estate broker that's just there for the quick dollar. But these downsizers, usually women-owned companies, are excellent. And what they're going to do, put the downsizers apart for a second here. Everyone should start the downsizing process immediately. If you're even considering it, even 4 or 5 years from now, start purging, start decluttering. Okay. And you want to be able to start with the rooms. If you're in a home, 4 or 5 bedroom home, and you're going to go to a 1 or 2 bedroom condo or apartment, start going after the rooms that you're not using, and the garage, and you can't get rid of the shovels and so on, but start going after the rooms that you aren't going to use. We always talk about create 3 piles. You've got the yes pile. You're moving. Yes means that's gone. It's going out today. You've got the maybe pile and you've got the no pile. What you wanted to know, we have to keep it. Okay, it's not moving. You need to move out that yes pile the same day, right away, because you're going to go out for a coffee, you're going to go out with friends, and you're going to get back to it, and guaranteed there's stuff in that yes pile that's going to get moved over to the maybe pile. So you create your 3 piles. You gotta get those ones out. You've got to talk to family. You've got to talk to friends. You don't know. Maybe there's a student that could use some furniture. Maybe there's a refugee, immigrant, first generation what we see a lot. Okay. Well, first of all, that generation spent a fortune on that dining room furniture and the bedroom, and it's huge and it's massive and it's not going to fit in, and it's like very emotional. They spent a lot of money on that. Came from nothing. But maybe there's going to be, so you can't sell it. You might get 5 cents, 10 cents on the dollar. They want thousands for it. And unfortunately, the reality is they're not going to get what they want. And so if you're, instead of throwing it out, if you can give it a second life, first generation immigrants, refugees, there's the emotional factor involved there. Okay. And they also have to go into it knowing that your kids aren't going to take a lot of your stuff. So all that silver that needs to be polished, all those Royal Daltons, all those things your kids don't want it. Unfortunately, they don't want it, and it's crushing. What do you mean you don't want these? I spent a fortune on this china and the silver, and we're going to be polishing that every month. It doesn't happen. So these are emotional conversations, part of the purging and decluttering process. Okay, once you go through all that, there has to come a point in time that you're saying, okay, I've tried to sell it. I've tried to give it away. Donations. Once you are beyond that, you've got to get rid of it. Get rid of it through a garage sale, or you're calling 1-800-GOT-JUNK or any other junk removal company, and you've got to get rid of it. Tough to do, but eventually you have to do it. The downsizers, by the way, where they can really help out, if you know where you're going, and we always say, know where you're going. In fact, we encourage actually making the move to your retirement home or your condo before you even sell the house, because it's emotional. You got to clean the house. You're going to be, especially if it's a family house, they're going through it all. They're vicious buyers. They're going through everything. It's always best to actually be where you're going to first before that home sale. So after all that, you got to get rid of it. The downsizers will come in, and they're going to measure out where you're going to. You're in a 5 bedroom, you're going down to a 2 bedroom. It's not all going to fit. Let's make some decisions as what are the must-haves, okay? And now we're talking stuff like frames, pictures. These are important must-haves. If that bedroom furniture is not going to fit, it's not going to fit.
Gotta go.
It's got to go. And, look at it as a new life. This isn't the last chapter of your life. This is a new life. Maybe you could buy a new bedroom furniture set. Maybe you could buy a new fridge and stove. Maybe you could buy something that will be your new life. So the downsizers are really, really good at helping with that process.
How long does it typically take? Is it 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Like it's from decision to moving and downsizing.
Well, you said the important word, from the decision.
Yeah.
Okay, because pre-decision, you're talking
happens.
years. You got to start decluttering. Okay, but you know what? We've had some situations. It's turned around in a couple of months. Mm-hmm. If they want it out, and let downsizers. If you've got some budgets for downsizers, great. What's going to dictate it is where you are going. That's ultimately going to determine the number, how long it's going to take. If you could find a place, then you want to get into that place. The moving and the downsizing, that could be done pretty quick. It's on your terms, but it could be done month, 2 months. It could be done. It's if there's an appetite to do it that quickly. Most people want to do it over a longer period of time.
Should we avoid these conversations around holiday time?
It's a good question. You have to be careful. It's very sensitive, but we're a family-run business. My wife and I run the business. We purposely don't take holidays during the holiday period, between Christmas and New Year's, let's say, because we get the calls that week. Why? Because,
Crazy.
We call them the hit and run kids. The hit and run kids, they live out of town. They come in 6 months. Oh my God, I didn't realize. Look at mom and everything's covered. And they're trying to put things into place before they leave on their flight on December 30th or 31st, So, it is, I always talk about these essential conversations and trigger events. Don't ruin Christmas supper by bringing up a very sensitive topic or a holiday dinner, whichever you're having. But I think the door needs to get open, especially if it's children that are coming in from out of town, to talk about or to find an excuse to bring up these conversations. If you see some bills piling up, if you hear of the neighbor moving or you had a cousin that had a heart attack, whatever it is, hey, what would you do in this situation? And it has to be brought up. And if that's the time to do it, when the family's together, it's actually quite common.
Matt, thanks so much. Really, really interesting. And I think you're such a wealth of knowledge, and we'll reinvite you for sure on the podcast, because I feel like you can talk about all of the topics we talk about at Clear Estate for roughly an hour. So amazing to have you, and thanks for your generosity. Thank you.
Well, Davide, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for bringing this very, very important topic out there. It's really appreciate you inviting me.
Thanks, man. Really interesting conversation with Matt, Sara, and it's crazy how much information there was in there. There's professionals out there. So we talked about real estate. We talked about the various professionals that are involved. We talked about emptying the last room and doing those two piles, what's going, not going.
Yeah.
We talked about taking measurements of furniture and going to the new house or the new place and seeing if the furniture fits. We also talked about the fact that your kids don't want your furniture. So it was a rich conversation. I think a couple of things there, and we talked about a little bit about it in the intro. There's clearly a relationship between the estate plan and the transition plan. They typically don't happen together, but they kind of need to be thought through together. One thing that was a bit of a shocker for me in that conversation is the cost. It costs a lot of money, and Matt gave us kind of some Montreal benchmarks, but costs a lot of money. I don't know if you were as shocked as I was, or maybe you're just more aware than I am. But
maybe slightly less shocked, but
I think it's very expensive.
It is very expensive. It absolutely is very expensive. And I think the reality is costs go up as they do, but in this particular space, you have an aging population combined with the fact that we have more advancements and more, medical expertise and technology that's helping us to live longer. But that's also seeing, significant trends in advanced age diseases that people are ending up with more and living with for longer periods of time, which obviously equates to more money being spent on their support and care.
In your experience, and I'm assuming that in the context of trust companies, a lot of this comes when the POA is activated. Do trust companies that are managing, for example, a POA have a good understanding or typically have a good relationship with somebody that has a good understanding of what the person expressed as a desire? I mean, once the POA is activated, the transition is pretty dramatic,
Yeah.
but is there a good understanding typically there from professionals and advisors around the beneficiary, or
Yeah.
are people most of the time blindsided by this?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there's always going to be surprises. And obviously, like a person's kind of aging and healthcare journey, like everybody's unique, right? And so there could be and their goals and values are also unique, right? And what might be important to one might not be as important to another one. And what pe some people define as important to their kind of dignified care is less important to others, right? So it just depends, but I would say generally speaking, if there is an incapacity, then the power of attorney for property and the power of attorney for personal care need to work closely together to to implement what's needed so that the healthcare and medical directives and things like that can be done effectively while keeping in mind balancing the budget and appropriately investing funds, etc.
I mean, you mentioned this in the past, but most people think they're going to have enough money to leave something behind when they do their estate plan.
Yes. Yeah.
That means that most people don't really think that they're going to run out of money.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And
It
maybe it's true for a lot of people, but for some people, you basically run out at the end. You run out or you cut services or the quality of life is impacted.
absolutely.
This should be a key piece in everybody's estate plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there is to Matt's point, like there's a analysis that should be done on when, I mean, yeah, realistically, we want to stay in our homes for as long as possible, but at a certain point, it may not be feasible, budget wise, right? And that's, I think, a growing problem for folks. But at the end of the day, like you should feel confident that the people that you've appointed in those roles as power of attorney for property, power of attorney for personal care are going to, look at the facts at the time because of course you can't possibly anticipate every, potential scenario. You just got to hopefully have the right people appointed to be able to look at the actual fact scenario at the time and make, sound decisions and are in your best interest.
And I'm assuming there's potential conflict there as well between various family members. So, I mean, as we always point out, that's also something to be
Absolutely.
thought through, both as part of the transition plan, but the estate plan.
Absolutely, because I can tell you that oftentimes, if you haven't thought about in your planning that some of your assets are going to be used towards, this type of budgeting, your beneficiaries haven't thought of it either.
For sure.
And the surprise will extend to them. Unless they are appointed as the power of attorney, obviously they'll have the insights if they're acting in that role. But if they're not, and those are generally the beneficiaries who have a lot of questions, are the ones that weren't involved in the power of attorney kind of process and administration. They're the ones that are going to have questions, right? What happened to all of mom and dad's money,
Yeah,
right?
and it goes back to the original, I mean, the couple of framing meetings that people need to have, which is first of all, there's an estate planning meeting where the money you need, the money for unforeseen events, which includes healthcare, and then the money you want to leave behind. And if you're very clear about that with your family members, and then if you have a transition plan around that, and if you are as transparent as you're comfortable being with all the stakeholders around, then that creates at least a common understanding of how things are going to play out. I think a lot of these upfront conversations, and I think you mentioned not everybody's comfortable, sharing everything or to a certain degree, but I think the more this is kind of laid out, the better it is for the future. I know during the holidays I had a conversation with my mom, and my mom, you know, we're in this business, and I had this conversation with my mom where I said, my mom has a condo, and she said, well, I want to leave the money of the condo to you and your sister. And I said, you should take care of yourself before you take care of me and my sister.
Yeah.
And she started crying because she said, no, I really want to take care of you. And I said, you should take care of yourself before you take care
Yeah.
before you take care of us. And so I think that was a great beginning, a trigger of a future
Mhm.
conversation around transition plan, which we started having during the holidays, and an estate planning conversation. And it's really not about estate planning because the will is done, and I know what's going to happen in the will, which is, co-executors and 50-50, but it's more about her intentions and the fact that we're comfortable telling her, hey, like, take care of yourself before you take care of us. You've done enough in your life for us. I think now it's time for you to take care of yourself. So it was an interesting conversation. Don't forget to share and subscribe to The Endgame by Clear Estate on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
ThinkBait. TNKR Media. Good talk.